on? It's NFL Draft Week, and I'm Tom Moore from VikeFans.com. Tonight, we're fortunate to welcome a man you've all come to know as the NFL Draft Guru. But during the day, he's Geoff Nichols. Geoff, welcome aboard. Are you ready to make heads or tails out of the Minnesota Vikings draft strategy for 2014 and give us a little bit of your insights on the rest of the squad?
I sure hope so. I'm happy that you've gotten me on here tonight, Tom. I look forward to hopefully providing some good content to all you members out there.
Sounds good. Well, we might as well start the discussion with the big question on all Viking fans' minds. And we want to know, what in the world do the Vikings do with that number 8 overall pick? Do they take a quarterback, go defense, or trade down so Rick Spielman can accumulate more draft choices?
You know what? As I look at the draft this year, I've never been more confused of what's going to happen within the first 7 picks. I think in the first 7 picks, Houston obviously is trying to look to move down. Even if they're sold on Javier and Clowney or not, they're trying to get the most value out of their pick. If that means they can get 2 or multiple first-round picks out of that number 1 pick this year and miss out on Javier and Clowney, and maybe pick up a Johnny Manziel or Blake Bortles within the top 5, I think they're definitely open to that idea. But like with any trade-down situation, you're going to need 2 teams, and both are going to have an interest in moving down and up. I think once you move down to the draft to number 8, if none of the QBs are off the board, Rick Spielman and the front office are going to have a big question to ask, and that's whether do they truly trust themselves in selecting the first QB off the board. They're going to have their choice of Johnny Manziel, Blake Bortles, Teddy Bridgewater, whoever they want, and you know, that first QB off the board has a proven track record of succeeding in the NFL. With that said, in 2011, when they drafted Christian Ponder, Cam Newton was the first QB on their board, and after that it was Christian Ponder. So in the Vikings' eyes, they did not reach for Ponder. Does that mean that Spielman's going to be a bit gun-shy when the number 8 pick comes along? I don't know. If you look at the value that's on the board at number 8, it's defense. I think taking a defensive player is going to be their first option. It's going to get them the best value and going to provide the most return for a new coach, Mike Zimmer. I think 1B is going to be trading down, but of course there's going to have to be interest in the middle of the draft board. I think a team like Chicago may be interested in moving up to 8. Dallas may be interested in moving up to 8, and that would be mostly for Aaron Donald. And then with Chicago having interest in Donald, the Vikings also have to think about, do they want Chicago to get Aaron Donald?
Right.
Do the Vikings trust enough in their offensive line to block him for the next decade if he turns into a Pro Bowl player? So those are kind of weighing the risks and rewards. Mm-hmm. But I think a secondary player, either a safety or a cornerback at number 8, is looking like the best bet at this point.
You mentioned 1B and being Aaron Donald. Is there any chance that Mike Zimmer takes Aaron Donald?
You know what? I do not know Mike Zimmer's feelings on Sharif Floyd. Last year, we did not truly get to receive a real Sharif Floyd being in the rotational role behind Kevin Williams. Mm-hmm. I think in the short stints that Sharif was on the field, he guessed a lot on whether there was going to be a run or a pass play. And then as the longer he got on the field, if he was on for a streak of 5-6 snaps in a row, he started to get a better grasp on what was going on and kind of how the offense was trying to flow against the Vikings defense. At that point, he was able to push the pocket a little bit. And in the Dallas game this past season, in the third quarter, he really did come alive. He showed a lot of ability to get around the edge and really push back the middle of the line and create a lot of havoc for Tony Romo. If he can consistently do that, which I think he has the potential to do, I don't think they'll take a defensive tackle at number 8.
Well, question for you on Sharif Floyd. I mean, he played last year at apparently 330, and he's lost 30 pounds, and word is he's given up meat. Is that a good loss of 30 pounds, or is that concerning to you?
You know what? I've heard a couple stories on that. I heard that Sharif had the weight on him. It was a healthy weight originally, but he wasn't getting the gains he wanted in the weight room. And with that, sometimes the best thing you can do is kind of subtract and then take 1 step back, take 2 steps forward. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably what they're trying to go at. And then also, if you look at the Mike Zimmer defense, the number 1 thing that Mike Zimmer preached in Cincinnati was 1, consistency, 2, rush the quarterback, and 3, be tenacious. In the be tenacious, you're going to need energy on the field, and dropping a few pounds is going to allow Sharif Floyd to stay on the field for longer periods of time.
Well, Geoff, Rick Spielman put you in this scenario. He gets a hold of some bad seafood in New York at lunch on Thursday. He calls you to fill in and make the Vikings' choice in round 1. Now, Aaron Donald's gone. Somebody's taking him. and those top couple of cornerbacks are gone as well. The number 8 pick comes up, and Johnny Manziel, Blake Bortles, Teddy Bridgewater, Derek Carr, Khalil Mack, and Sammy Watkins are still available. What do you do?
In that scenario, I'm taking Khalil Mack and not looking back. I think to be able to get a linebacker that's capable of rushing the passer is something that Mike Zimmer is going to need at some point within the first 2 years of building his own team here. I think to take Khalil Mack at the number 8 pick is, first of all, a great value. I don't think he's actually going to be there. But in this hypothetical situation, I'm not going to look back at Mack. He fills a need on this team, and he's going to prove to be a productive player right away the second you pop him in the linebacker in the NFL.
Any concerns about the level of competition he saw at Buffalo?
When you look at linebackers, I'm not all that concerned. I think when you look at someone, he has the power to push the tackles. He has the finesse to get around them, and he also has the read and react ability. So that's not a very big concern I have with Mack. I guess if a quarterback or even a wide receiver, I would be a little more concerned.
Well, Spielman decides not to have that seafood, so he goes ahead and he goes to the draft. So he's now in charge again. And you're watching this, and you hear that he's traded the 8th overall pick and has moved down to a spot in the low to mid-20s in the first round. Who or even what position do you think he might be aiming for if he does that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I think that may be in the Vikings' best interest to make such a move. When you move down into those 20s picks, the first thing you think of is taking a quarterback who's fallen. Although I'm not going to consider one of the quarterbacks falling to 20 a big surprise, because I think there are going to be impact quarterbacks available in the 20s. But I think the scenario would be to trade back. If a quarterback you like is there, you take them, and you're not going to look back, and that quarterback's not going to have as much pressure on them as being a top 10 pick in the NFL. But I think realistically, if a quarterback's not there, they're going to try to go off a cornerback at that spot in the draft, because at that point you can look at the risks associated with someone like a Justin Gilbert or a Kyle Fuller or even Darqueze Dennard and say that at that point the reward of taking them, and if they turn out, is greater than, I guess, the value of the pick.
And when we look at the quarterback, because it's the tough question for everybody to answer, you know the Viking team, you know what their skill set is, you probably get an indication of what type of offense Norv Turner's going to run. Of all the quarterbacks, if you just had your pick of the quarterbacks, which one do you think fits the scheme of the Viking offense with Norv Turner best?
You know what? The funniest thing is, I think the best quarterback that fits the Viking system is Blake Bridgewater, a combination between Blake Bortles and Teddy Bridgewater. But in all honesty, I believe that Norv Turner would most likely take Blake Bortles if he was there on the board, although that's not the pick I would take. Blake Bortles has the upside that Norv Turner is looking for. He has the size that Norv Turner likes in the pocket, which I think is a big factor in his offense, having a quarterback that's able to stand there, take a hit, and deliver the ball downfield. But, you know, that's not going to be a fan favorite pick, I don't think, if they take Bortles. But I think we'll know after 3-4 years whether the pick's worked out again, and hopefully it works out a little better this time around.
So Bortles will be Norv Turner's pick. You said he's not the pick you would take. Which quarterback would you take?
I might not be a bandwagon fan with the rest of the media on this one, but I'm going with Teddy Bridgewater, and I've been on Teddy Bridgewater's bandwagon since the beginning. I've watched enough film of all of the quarterbacks to say that although a lot of people have dinged him on his arm strength, I think his accuracy is such an elite tool for him that he's able to offset some of that arm strength he lacks with being able to put the ball in places where defensive backs cannot touch it. Whenever you're giving your wide receiver an opportunity to grab the ball without allowing the defensive back to touch it, you're going to succeed in the NFL. And then if you kind of look at his track record and his ups and downs at Louisville, he proved that he could win against competition that was better than his own team, which means that, in my mind, he was the one running that offense and bringing them to a higher level, not the opposite. And I think if you look at ceiling and floor of the quarterbacks, I think with Bridgewater, you know a little better what you're getting in comparison to both Manziel and Bortles. And if he doesn't develop to his full potential, you're still going to have a quarterback that's going to fit in that 17 to 14 range in the NFL. And if you look at the Seahawks this past year, they had a great defense, but Russell Wilson, he's no top 10 quarterback in the NFL. You can win in this league without having an elite quarterback as long as the supporting cast is great.
Well, Geoff, when we talk about the quarterback position outside of the draft, Matt Castle looks to be the unquestioned starter for the team after his re-signing. And last year he seemed to play really well against the lesser defenses, but then he struggled against those elite pass defenses. What do you see Norv Turner doing to try to elevate his play in 2014, or at least make him consistent against the good teams on pass defense?
For Matt Castle, I think the biggest thing the Vikings can do for him is name him the week 1 starter and then roll with him until he either is really hit the wall and is not succeeding in Norv Turner's offense, or we're just going to roll with him throughout the entire season. I think if you look at the ups and downs of our season last year, and especially Matt Castle's performance, I don't think he was given a fair chance to run the offense to its full potential. Having Ponder start the season, then putting Castle in, then putting Freeman in, then I think there was a week of Ponder again, and then Castle. Usually when you're in week 1 in the NFL, you've had all the training camp and you're had all the whole preseason to kind of get your offense in line. The second you switch up the quarterbacks, everyone's not as comfortable. Wide receivers aren't sure when the ball is going to be delivered. The quarterback doesn't know quite where the wide receiver is going to want the ball placed for them. So I think it's kind of, if you look at week 1 against Detroit, the Vikings played Detroit fairly close. It was a close game, and I'm not saying that Detroit's that great of a team because I think they obviously have their needs and need to improve as well. But then if you look at the team, say, in week 10 of the season, Detroit looked far superior. And that's because they had that consistency in offense. Matt Stafford had taken all the snaps for them. If Matt Castle can take all the snaps for our offense, I feel like he'll feel comfortable, the wide receivers will feel comfortable, and we'll be operating more as a unit without the question marks.
We turn back to the draft, and when we look at the last couple of drafts, we've seen Rick Spielman replace an aging kicker a couple years ago and a punter last year. And we got a question from the superstar Mike Morris for you, and he wants to know, does he surprise everyone this year by taking a long snapper in the 5th round to replace veteran Cullen Loeffler?
I don't think so. I think Blair Walsh and Loeffler's relationship is too good to mess with.
All right. We'll make sure the superstar knows what you said.
Oh, he can listen to that answer, and I don't think Blair Walsh will disagree either.
Well, it sure seemed like last year our offensive line struggled really for much of the year, and some of the Minnesota media have said that the depth is even more of a concern than the starters. Geoff, when you look at it, what are the biggest trouble spots on the line, and how do you see the Vikings addressing this area either in the draft or in the second wave of free agency?
I think immediately, if you look at our offense, the big weak link is left guard. I think the offensive line as a whole has succeeded, and they were a top 10 line again last year. Matt Khalil kind of had a step back, kind of a sophomore slump kind of year. He did have some sort of injury concern that came up in the OTAs or mini camp last week, so I think that could have played into it. So I think left tackle will be squared away with Khalil. Left guard, they re-signed Charlie Johnson, which I don't think is a long-term solution at the position, and I know a lot of fans will agree with me on that one. John Sullivan has center lockdown. Brandon Fusco had a good season last year. He definitely had his ups and downs, but he's still a developing talent. I don't see any reason why we would replace him at right guard. At right tackle, Phil Lodeholtz, he had his ups and downs too. He's a great run blocker, and I think in our offense, when you're running with Adrian Peterson, he's an asset. In pass protection, his side fails more than Khalil's side, but I think that's fairly typical in the NFL. The right tackle is not nearly as good of a pass protector than blindside protector. But as we looked at that left guard position, I think they're going to try to pick someone up probably in the 4th, 5th round of the draft. It's not an immediate need by any means, but it's somewhere that they're going to want to try to take a raw talent, kind of like when they took Fusco a few years ago, where they can develop him behind Charlie Johnson and then hopefully plug him in when he's ready to play.
And do you see this line, when you look at it overall, is this a top offensive line, a mid-tier, or a bottom-tier offensive line as it stands right now?
Last year they were a top 10 line, and then I believe the year previous they were top 5, but that partially had to do with Adrian Peterson getting so many carries. In my mind, they're definitely a superior run-blocking line than a pass protection line. In a Norv Turner system, they're going to be asked to pass protect more than they were under Leslie Frazier and Bill Musgrave. But I think they're going to be a top 10 line again. I wouldn't tag them as elite by any means, but I think they're definitely better than the average to solid range.
Okay. Well, by the time folks hear this tomorrow on VikeFans.com, they will have heard from Corey Chavis on what his picks are for the draft challenge that he has. And one of the areas of needs he points out is a safety to pair with Harrison Smith. Geoff, when you look at it and you specifically think about the draft, do you think Jamarcus Sanford possesses the right skill set for the Mike Zimmer defense, or should we be looking for a safety in the draft fairly early?
Well, I guess Corey Chavis and I are in agreement. I think the Vikings are going to look heavily at safeties in the first round. At minicamp, you heard Mike Zimmer talk about Harrison Smith, how they're going to unleash him a little more. In the Tampa 2 defense under Leslie Frazier, the two safeties on the field are asked to play zone coverage on the hashes. So both play a similar role, both the free and strong safeties. So there isn't as much of a strong safety coming down to play in man coverage and against the slot. And that's going to change in Mike Zimmer's defense. So I think the biggest question is whether they're going to play Harrison as the free safety or the strong safety, because he possesses skills for both. I think if you look at how he played in 2012, he played better at the free safety spot than the strong safety. And last year, in the few downs he played at strong safety, I think I would weight that more heavily than how he played as a free safety. What you have to come down to is in college, Harrison Smith was not that great at man coverage. And I don't want to be convinced that he can cover a tight end on a regular basis or against slot receivers, which I think that means you put him at free safety and then you need to draft a strong safety because Jamarcus Sanford can't do that either. So I don't think they'll take a safety at 8. It would have to come as a trade down into the mid-teens, and then they'll have their choice of safeties. But I do believe that's their number 1 or number 2 need on defense.
Where do you see Andrew Zendejo fitting in?
You know what? I think he's a great special team player and someone you're going to bring in after someone gets injured, or he's kind of an up-tempo guy. He's not afraid to come down and hit the ball carrier. He can break down runners in the open field. But I don't see him as a regular starter moving into the future.
Well, when we turn to the linebacker side, we've got a whole bunch of them on the roster with Mike Mowdy and Jasper Brinkley, Audie Cole, Chad Greenway, and Gerald Hodges, but still a ton of question marks, really at all 3 positions. Geoff, when you look at it, which of those players would you expect to flourish in the new Mike Zimmer aggressive style of defense, and how severe is our need to draft an impact linebacker in the draft on Thursday or Friday?
I have mixed feelings on the linebacker position. I think Chad Greenway is going to have a much stronger season next year. He was injured this past season, and I think there were some disagreements and frustration with how our defense was being run last season, which kind of led to the snowball effect where he kind of was playing so-so and then it moved in the wrong direction, I guess a lot of people would say. But I think he'll hold down that strong side linebacker spot. When you look at the middle, they brought Jasper Brinkley on a very limited, low-risk contract. He's kind of going to be that downhill run thumper. He didn't fit into Tampa 2 because he can't cover worth a lick. But you also have Audie Cole there who will be competing with him. And then on the Will side, I really have trouble seeing a definitive starter. I think right now the incumbent would be Gerald Hodges kind of by default. And I think he has the physical skill if he can bulk up just a little more to be a successful Will linebacker. But my big worry with him is he's still better in coverage than as an actual linebacker coming down and stopping the run. And I think that's kind of the biggest reason we drafted him last year is because we were expecting him to play in the Tampa 2 defense. So I think if you look at the linebackers as a whole, the strong side is set with Greenway. You have decent competition in the middle with Brinkley and Cole. And if you look at Zimmer's defense, they play in the nickel over 50% of the time, which means the middle linebacker is not going to be on the field anyways. So I don't think that would be weighted more heavily than the weak side linebacker spot, where you have Gerald Hodges. And I think they're going to place Mowdy over there, actually, instead of in the middle, whereas a lot of people think. And then maybe they'll play a rotation of Hodges and Mowdy, but if they can make a pick to shore up that weak side linebacker spot in either round 2 or 3, I think it would be in the best interest of Mike Zimmer on the defensive side.
And we talk about getting the linebacker situation squared away so we can stop opposing offenses. When we look at our own offense, you've got Cordero Patterson, who really obviously excites the fan base. But do you think he's going to be able to be a full part of this offense and still be an elite kick returner? And if not, where do you think he should be focused?
The thing with Cordero Patterson, I think that he really has going for him is his size. The biggest thing with kick returner wide receiver combos is the injury risk on the kick return itself. And I think we saw that with Percy Harvin a bit. Everyone's worried. Not that Percy Harvin's the smallest guy. He definitely has a lot of muscle on him and can take a hit, and he's tough. But, you have a player coming downhill at full speed and trying to just take his head off. And I think Cordero Patterson's big enough where he can absorb those hits a little better. So I wouldn't worry about him as the kick returner, as with the wide receiver. But I think the biggest detriment to Cordero Patterson is himself. Last year, when he played wide receiver, he tried to use his speed almost too much. I think if he could slow down just half a step and really focus on his route running and cuts to get open, he'll be that much more successful in the long run. He can really turn on his speed once he catches the ball, but the biggest thing for him is creating separation on a consistent basis. And if he can do that, he's going to be a great wide receiver in the NFL.
Sometimes people have noticed that in 2013, he would sometimes catch the ball with his body. Is that something that you think is correctable for him?
I think for him it is. For other players, it's not, because I've seen Cordero Patterson catch with his hands on a regular basis. And that's last year coming out of the draft. A lot of people use that as a tool to drop him down the draft board. But if you watched all the film, he wants to catch with his hand, but there's times he just loses a little bit of focus and he catches with his body. But with that said, the big worry with body catchers is that they're going to either have the ball ricochet off their pads and they're going to drop it, or that the cornerback or safety coming up is going to be able to dislodge the ball. Patterson is strong enough hands to hold that ball to his body tightly, and I think he has that going a little bit for him. I'm not trying to come up with excuses for him because it kind of sounds like that was, but he can catch with his hands, and I've seen him do it before. And last year, I think the first few weeks of the season when we didn't see as much Cordero Patterson, they're kind of working on his mechanics and kind of trying to get him to catch with his hands more, to run better routes. And I think Mike Zimmer and Norv Turner are going to kind of have to take a step back with him, make sure he has the fundamentals down, and then unleash him.
In the other key offensive position, we've talked about quarterback and receiver, is running back, and with Toby Gerhart moving on to Jacksonville, is the answer behind Adrian Peterson on the roster with Matt Asiata, Zach Line, and Bradley Randall, or do you expect Minnesota to take a running back somewhere maybe in rounds 3 or 4 this weekend?
You know what? I would expect them to take a running back in rounds 3 or 4. Actually, this might be a surprise to some, but they could actually go running back in round 2, depending on what they do in the first round. Norv Turner is known for having 2 solid ball carriers with a scat back as his third running back. I think they have the scat back covered in Bradley Randall, and that's going to go to him in training camp. And then they obviously have their number 1 ball carrier in Adrian Peterson. What Norv Turner likes to do is he likes to switch out his running backs quite often to keep them fresh throughout the game. I think the plan has been of Adrian Peterson to cut back his carries a little bit this year to keep him fresh for the entire season, keep him healthy. He had a kind of a injury-plagued year last year, which I think was more just kind of a fluky deal than him actually wearing down, which some people will argue was the case. But I see them taking another power running back in rounds 2 through 4, somewhere depending on where they can get the best value.
Is there somebody in particular that you have your eye on in round as high as 2?
In round 2, it's hard to say they would actually go this route because I think it's a bit of a reach, but I wouldn't cross it off the list. I think Carlos Hyde does make a lot of sense to the Vikings. He's a great third down pass blocker, which in Norv Turner's offense, they're not going to put Adrian Peterson out there to pass block on third down. And then if you bring him into the game, he's going to be a hard runner. He's going to push the pile. He's going to drive into the linebackers, which is what you like to see. And, maybe he'll even wear down the defense a bit for Adrian Peterson. Over the years, Gerhart's kind of been the bruiser, and Adrian's kind of been the finesse guy with power. And I think that's going to change a little bit this year. They're going to ask Adrian to be more of a finesse runner. And being able to get that to happen, they're going to have someone that has a little bit of power coming out of the backfield. So, I don't know. Carlos Hyde makes sense in round 2. Otherwise, if you look down the draft board, I think Kareem DeCarry is going to drop a little bit, and he'll probably be there at the end of the 3rd round, top of the 4th round. He makes a lot of sense. But my favorite running back in the draft is Charles Sims. I think he's highly underrated and is going to go higher than people think. If he's there at our 2nd, 3rd round pick that we picked up from the Seahawks, I would not be surprised to see the Vikings go in that direction.
Gotcha. Well, at least we got 3 or 4 guys to really keep our eyes on. And as we transition to the last part of our conversation today, Geoff, we've got a modified version of our rapid fire session that we give to our players who come in. But in your case, I'm going to give you a little bit something different. I'm going to give you a name of a current Viking player. And what I'm going to look for you to give us is a quick 1 or 2 sentence assessment of them and your expectations out of them in the 2014 season. Are you ready to give it a go?
I think so. I think it should be fun.
All right, here's the big dog, Mike Zimmer.
Mike Zimmer, I think he's very motivated for the season because he has a chip on his shoulder and something he wants to prove in the NFL. He's going to have a tenacious defense and is going to be determined to win in his first year.
Backup guard Jeff Baca.
He's going to get a chance in training camp. I wouldn't slot him into any starting position at this point, but he will be in the competition for left guard.
Okay. Brian Robinson.
He's going to be asked to be one of the leaders on the defensive side of the ball. That's something new to him. He should have a productive season, and I think he fits better into Mike Zimmer's defense as more of a run stopper first, pass rusher second.
Do you see him potentially getting double-digit sacks this season?
If you look at the pass rushers in Mike Zimmer's pass defense, I say no. With Brian Robinson's ability to shed block and be able to cut off the quarterback's angles, I say it's possible. I wouldn't say it's likely, though.
Okay. Jeff Locke.
Jeff Locke, I think he's going to have a better season this year than last. He was inconsistent to begin the year, and I think that was partially because he wasn't used to the snap and being in a dome. But playing outdoors, I think he thrived at UCLA being outdoors, and he's actually verbalized that he enjoys playing outdoors before. He'll have a good season.
Okay. Kyle Rudolph.
Coming back off the injury, I think he has a lot to prove and almost has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He's excited to play in Norv Turner's system, and I think Norv Turner's excited to have him as well. I expect some creativity in the play calling and expect him to have a decent to above average season.
Wide receiver Jarius Wright.
Very underrated and underused in Bill Musgrave's system. Norv Turner will give him a fair shot, and he'll be a deep threat for us.
Everson Griffin.
He's very thankful to be here, first of all, and I know he's verbalized that he wanted to stay a Viking ever since he hit free agency. But I think he wants to prove that he deserves the contract he got, and I think he'll be able to do that.
Okay. Safety Harrison Smith.
Once again, coming off an injury-plagued 2013, I think he'll have a more defined role in Mike Zimmer's defense instead of just being a safety that plays in the zone coverage on the hashes. He'll be asked to do a lot more near the line of scrimmage and against both tight ends and slot receivers.
And finally, cornerback Xavier Rhodes.
Xavier Rhodes, I think he has a lot of weight on his shoulders. This is, for cornerbacks, year 2 is kind of the prove-it year. He showed he had that physical aspect to his game and was a gritty cornerback on the outside. I think having Captain Munnerlyn on the opposite side of him is going to be a big help and not as much weight on his shoulders going forward. As long as he can stay healthy and hopefully he figured out some of his endurance issues that he had on the field this past season, he should show some progression in 2014.
Well, Geoff, we hope our VikeFans.com members are better prepared for what to look for in the draft starting on Thursday. But before I let you go, I want to ask you to give us your pre-draft estimation of how this 2014 Viking team will finish.
I think it's hard to say. I think a lot of the players that we're going to take in the draft are going to add more in the future than now. I think this is kind of going to be a transition year for Mike Zimmer to kind of get his team on the field. I think we'll be better than last season, but we don't think we're going to be a playoff team this year. Of course, playoffs are definitely a possibility in the NFL that changes so quickly, and injuries can change things to your competitors. But right now, I think they're somewhere between a 7-9 and 8-8 team.
And please at least tell us that we have this to look forward to. We're not going to be the 31st ranked defense, are we?
I sure hope not. And I don't see that happening again.
Again, Geoff, thanks for joining us tonight, and we look forward to your feature stories and interactions with the fans on VikeFans.com throughout the entire 2014 season.
No, thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate being able to come on here and hopefully share some information that you can use on Thursday night when you're watching the draft. I know everyone's been looking forward to it.
Sounds great. Thanks again.
All right, thanks, Tom.